The following is a demonstration of a punch front. She begins with a running hurdle with her arms by her ears. Her feet will join together slightly in front of her hips for a punch takeoff. The punch should be done in a hollow position as her shoulders reach the top of the punch. Her hips will continue to rise to rotate around her shoulders. Her hands can grab her knees to maintain a tucked position as she drives her heels down and continues to lift her head up. She then will begin to spot her landing as her arms release and her hips begin to open. Her feet will land in front of her with a slight squat and her focus forward and her arms up.
The following is a demonstration of a back walkover with proper technique. She begins with her good leg in front with her weight in her bad leg. She brings her arms up by her ears and begins leaning back, keeping her core engaged. Before her hands reach the ground, she begins lifting her good leg. Once her hands are firmly on the ground, she pushes off her bad leg and continues kicking both legs overhead, keeping them separate and straight with pointed toes and her shoulders over her hands the entire time. She finishes standing in a lunge.
The following video is a back extension roll to handstand. To gain momentum, the gymnast begins in tall releve. As she begins to roll down, her hips should be close to her heels. The gymnast should maintain her arms by her ears as not to drop her chest. The gymnast should pass through a candlestick position to initiate the extension. As her arms make contact with the floor, the tension should remain to pull her shoulders off of the ground. Her toes should continue to pull towards the ceiling as her shoulders open up to a handstand position. Her back leg should remain pointed at the ceiling as her front leg comes down. The gymnast should then finish in a lunge. As she begins her back handspring, her arms swing behind her with her knees slightly bent and her chest slightly forwards. She then goes into a deeper squat, keeping her knees over her toes as her arms swing up. The jump for the back handspring should go up on a diagonal as her arms reach her ears. As she passes through a handstand, she will begin her repulsion through her shoulders. As her hands begin to leave the floor, her hips should be open as her legs snap down with a good distance between them. She should continuously pull her feet underneath her as her arms lift up, finishing with her shoulders over her hips over her toes. The gymnast begins with a running hurdle. Notice that her knee is below her hip line, for the hurdle should be long and low, not short and high. As she is finishing her hurdle, her arms go in front of her to help propel her with forward motion. She then pushes off her front leg as she continues to drive her back leg. Her shoulder angle and reach should be extended in front so that she is completely off of the floor. As her hands reach the floor, she should have tension throughout her arms, implementing a block through her shoulders as her front leg now begins to join her back leg. As she blocks off the floor, her head should be in a neutral position. Now her feet should be together, finishing the heel drive. Her feet should land underneath her with her knees slightly bent as her block continues to pull her head and chest up to a neutral position. The gymnast should be able to execute a rebound out of her handspring. The gymnast begins with a running hurdle with her arms by her ears. As she places her hands down, they should do a quarter turn. As her hands reach the ground, they should be a nice distance away from her front foot. Her head should be neutral in between her arms as her back leg begins to drive up. Her shoulder should show a repulsion as her dominant arm begins to leave the floor and her feet are joining together. The gymnast should finish blocking through the floor as she lifts up her arms and snaps her legs down. As her feet land on the ground, her core should be engaged, lifting along with her arms. The landing of the round off should resemble the start of a standing back handspring in a slight squat so she can push through her toes and leave the floor. Her jump should go up and back on a diagonal as her hands reach back on the floor. She will then pass through a handstand position with a repulsion through her shoulders and her feet going up towards the ceiling. Her feet should continue to snap down as she lifts her chest up. The gymnast should ride her set as long as possible, pulling up to her arms as she reaches the top of her set. Her knees will start to tuck into her chest. Once her shoulders reach the top of her set, her body should rotate around her shoulders. The tuck should help the rotation as she continues to lift her head. Her landing should be centered with her shoulders over her hips, over her toes, and her head neutral.